Madam President,
Senator from Oregon.
not too long ago, we had a vote on whether or not to start a debate on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And the majority said yes, start the debate. Then why aren't we here in that debate? Well, the simple answer is we have a process whereby you have to have 60, a supermajority of the Senate, decide to start a debate. In other words, there is the ability to exercise a veto over whether or not a bill is worthy for consideration on this floor, even if it's supported by the majority of legislators. That effort is really about destroying the ability of this Senate to address the big issues facing America. What bigger issue is there in a republic than stopping billionaires from buying elections, to stop gerrymandering from destroying equal representation, to stop state laws that create prejudicial barriers designed to target specific groups to keep them from voting, barriers to the ballot box, to steal the right to vote? What bigger, more fundamental issue is there than that? And yet we can't even start a debate. In fact, we spend a lot of time debating whether to debate, and that's wasted time on the floor. So truly that vote we took was symbolic of two things. The first is that we're failing to address one of the biggest issues we face in this nation, the integrity of our election system, the corruption of our election system. And second, that this Senate has become dysfunctional. When Ben Franklin was walking out of the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman what kind of government they'd created, a monarchy or a republic. And he is reported to have responded, a republic if you can keep it. We've strived through 234 years to keep that republic, through war, through depression, through social unrest, through global pandemic. We've fought for 234 years to ensure that, as expressed by Lincoln at Gettysburg, government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. But as the American philosopher John Dewey once said, democracy has to be born anew every generation. It's up to each generation to take up the cause and fight to protect the foundations of our republic. So we are facing a moment of crisis once again when this institution has veered far afield from that time when it was declared to be the world's greatest deliberative body. Now it is perhaps the world's most dysfunctional legislative body, unwilling and unable to even debate, let alone vote, on the biggest issue of our time, the defense of our republic from the corrupting forces of power, of billionaires buying elections, of gerrymandering, and certainly of barriers to the ballot box. So we have a responsibility to take up this cause, to understand its source, and to address it, to restore the Senate as a deliberative body. One of the ways to evaluate our dysfunction is to look at the trend in the number of amendments considered on the U.S. Senate floor. In the 109th session of Congress, 2005 through 2007, that was 314 amendments. In the 116th, the 2 years that we just passed, that was 26. 314 amendments to 26. And most of the amendments that were allowed of those 26 went to just 2 members, so most members had no opportunity to offer amendments. The trends in cloture filings, that is, the motion to close debate, give us some understanding of what has happened. They were extremely rare in the past because the Senate understood it was a simple majority body. That's the way the founders designed it. So very rarely, there had to be an effort to actually close debate because members went on forever speaking. But it was rare. In 2010 through 2019, just 3 times. 2030 through 40, 4 times. 2050 through 60, 2 times. But then in 1970 forward, things changed. And in 1970 through March 7th of 1975, 57 filings to close debate in 4 years versus 34 from 1910 forward to 1970. This explosion in filings, and that was just on policy legislation, led to a reform in 1975. The rule for closing debate, the old rule was 2/3 of senators voting, was changed to 3/5 of senators duly chosen or sworn. That is 60 votes, regardless of how many people were on the floor voting. That rule change was started, if you will, generated just in those years from 70 to 74, where you had these 57 cloture motions, which is nothing compared to today. Nothing, which I'll go on to expand on. But that 1975 rule change, because instead of saying it was a percent of those present and voting, instead it was a percent of the Senate, it means that unwittingly we transformed the way that you delayed things in order to exercise leverage. We had, under the old rule, a public process where you had to take the floor, as I am right now, and speak at length in order to delay while your teammates worked to negotiate an amendment, negotiate a compromise, make sure the public had read the bill, make sure the press had seen the bill, make sure the senators had vetted the bill. All those are valuable. That delay in order to improve the process is valuable. Under the old rule, it was a public process. The whole nation saw it, and they could judge whether you were a champion or whether you were a disaster. And you got that feedback. Under that old rule, it was not just a public process, but it took enormous energy. Under the new rule, no show, not necessary to show up for debate, and not necessary to show up to vote. A no-show, no-effort veto that transformed this Senate. Well, the result was it made it so easy to obstruct that people decided to obstruct a lot. That 1975 cloture rule backfired by creating this no-show, no-effort obstruction. Let me give you a sense of this. During the period 1960 through 70, some 25 cloture motions to close debate. But in the next decade, over 100 in the 70s. In the 80s, over 200. In the 90s, over 300. In the 2000s, over 400. And in 2010 through 2020, 1,029 motions to close debate. That is the disaster we are living in right now. And instead of it just being, let's slow things down on final passage, it became, let's slow things down on amendments. So we went from 0 cloture motions on amendments from 2020 through 2060 to 143 just in one 10-year period. And it expanded to nominations. We went from 0 from 1910 through 1960 to 545 during 2010 through 2020. Motions to proceed to legislation, we went from 0 during the 50s to 175 in 2010. So it expanded. This process of a supermajority vote to proceed expanded from being rare to being common. It expanded from being on final passage of legislation to everything. Amendments, motions to proceed, every aspect of the work that we do here. Now, here's the very strange thing. This use of a supermajority would absolutely have astounded and appalled our founders. Our founders were operating under the Confederation Congress at the time they were writing the Constitution. And the Confederation Congress had a requirement for a supermajority. And that supermajority paralyzed the Confederation Congress. So they were not able to raise an army to put down Shays' Rebellion. They were not able to raise the money to pay for the Revolutionary War veterans. And so our founders said, whatever you do, don't adopt a supermajority. And we have Hamilton writing, if 2/3 of the whole number of members had been required, the history of every political establishment in which such a principle has prevailed is a history of impotence, perplexity, and disorder. Hamilton, in another Federalist paper, wrote, if a pertinacious minority can control the majority, tedious delays, continual negotiation and intrigue, contemptible compromises of the public good will result. And then we have Madison, who said, in all cases where justice or the general good might require new laws or active measures, the fundamental principle of free government would be reversed under a supermajority. It would be no longer the majority that would rule, the power would be transferred to the minority. He's pointing out it stands the very structure of a legislative body on its head. He went on to note that the result of the supermajority, remember they were experiencing this under the Confederation Congress, is to produce the following: that the minority might take advantage to screen themselves from equitable sacrifices to the general weal, or in particular emergencies to extort unreasonable indulgences. So here are our founders saying, we experienced a supermajority, don't ever do it. And they wrote the Constitution so a supermajority was reserved only for special circumstances, like evicting members, like considering a treaty, like overruling a presidential veto. So why are we here today doing exactly what the founders said not to do and experiencing exactly the results that they had experienced under the Confederation Congress? So my friends, we have a responsibility to restore the function of this body. We need to streamline the nomination process. Think about how a nomination works. You vote to go to executive session. You have a motion to proceed to a nomination. You vote on proceeding. You hold a debate. You hold a vote. And then you've proceeded, and then you hold a debate, and then you vote, and then you have 2 hours of post-debate, and then finally vote. That is a crazy system to be able to consider a nomination. It eats up huge amounts of our time when a simple vote to proceed, limited debate, simple vote to proceed, you're on the floor, simple time to consider it, and a vote on whether or not you're going to allow the person to fill the position the person has been nominated for. And this sort of streamlining would save us all a tremendous amount of time that could be dedicated to actual debate and actual amendments. And then there's this use of a supermajority on motion to proceed to legislation, using a blockade to prevent debate, not to facilitate debate, as is sometimes argued for the supermajority, that it can slow things down, facilitate debate, make sure bills are read, make sure there's a chance to negotiate. No, to prevent debate. We shouldn't spend time debating whether to debate. Let's just have a set hour to consider whether to move to a bill, and then we either move to it or we don't. How about amendments? I noted the collapse of the ability of senators to amend. Senators in the minority want to do amendments. Senators in the majority want to do amendments. We all have ideas and thoughts on how to change things or improve things. We want to make our case, but we don't get to do it here anymore. Don't we have a bipartisan vested interest in restoring amendments to the deliberations of the Senate? No, I was pondering this question because we seem to be locked in a cycle where given partisan differences in the nation, partisan differences that are increased by social media and increased by cable television, we just can't seem to come together to be able to make this place work as it's supposed to, as our responsibility is to. But we have gotten to the point where we are utterly, utterly damaging the United States of America. You know, the president of China, President Xi, he's saying, hey, there's a world competition between democratic republics and authoritarian world. Look what we've done in China. We went from bicycles, and then we had cars and traffic jams, and now we have bullet trains, 16,000 miles of bullet trains. Look what we're accomplishing. Look at how many millions have been lifted out of poverty, and look how paralyzed the United States is. And why is the United States paralyzed? Because this chamber cannot conduct a simple debate and a vote like every state legislature across this country does. So, colleagues, let's come together. Let's restore debate. Let's restore amendments. Let's save and savor and improve the ability of the minority to participate in the process. But let's also remember that balance of the Senate involved getting to a final decision, a simple majority vote as the founders intended. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.